Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to this first session in the news stream here at MIPCOM 2013. My name's Simon Spanswick. I'm Chief Executive of the Association for International Broadcasting. AIB is the not-for-profit industry body for international TV and radio. Now, along with some of our members in the global news industry, we've been working with Reed Meadem to put these sessions together. Now, it goes without saying that news is big business. More news channels are on the air than ever before, and the growth doesn't seem to be slowing. In the last 12 months, we've seen, for example, news channels in India targeting domestic audiences in multiple languages start up. In Nigeria, TVC News is a new English language channel that went on the air in February, targeting Africa and the rest of the world. This summer, I-24 launched in Israel, bringing 3 language services to the Middle East. And even in Myanmar, there are now half a dozen commercially funded news channels. Now, as these channels launch and establish themselves, they, along with their longer-established peers, have to cope with remarkable changes that are happening in consumption patterns among audiences in just about every market in the world. For example, many people now rely on digital sources, particularly social networks, to learn about breaking news. In the UK, a report was published last month by the media regulator Ofcom that said that whilst television is an important source of news, with 78% of all UK adults saying that they use TV as a news source, almost a third of all UK adults use the internet for news. And similar statistics are coming out from other territories. So there's clearly massive competition for established news broadcasters from digital players. What can broadcasters do to maintain and grow their audiences in the always-on digital era? This morning we're going to discuss the opportunities, look at some of the threats perhaps, and discover about digital partnerships that have been created. We've got a great lineup of guests and we're going to have a great conversation and debate that I hope is going to give everyone something to think about and everybody will learn something today. So I'd like you to join with me in welcoming our guest this morning, Winther, who's creator of the award-winning Dining with the Enemy, Moeed, Ahmad, manager of the new media department at Al Jazeera Media Network, Andy Mitchell, director of partnerships at Facebook, John Steinberg, president and COO of BuzzFeed, and Peter Bale, who's vice president and general manager digital at CNN. International? International. Welcome to everybody. Now, to set the scene, let's just do a 30-second canter along the panel, a little introduction to who you are and what your company's up to in this space. Let's start with Gree.
Okay, so I'm coming from the production side, and I'm going to talk about how I took news content and created a factual entertainment format to reach new and bigger audiences.
Thank you.
So Al Jazeera, as you know, we're sponsoring the event, so that's what we're up to. But outside of that, thank you for coming, by the way. But outside of that, we're launching, expanding a lot in terms of TV channels. We just launched in America. We had a channel in the Balkans a couple of years back. We're going to be launching a channel in Turkey, hopefully next year. But the thing that I'm really excited to talk about is our endeavor into the digital space. We're going to be launching an online-only channel, hopefully later part of this year or early next year, which is going to be very digitally native, extremely engaged. So we'll talk more about that later today.
Great.
Facebook isn't just a social platform. Obviously, you're there to connect with your friends and family and colleagues, but also more and more we are a news source discovery platform. People connect with news sources. They get stories directly from them in their news feed, and then also people share content with their friends and family, and more we're driving referrals to news sources and continuing to grow as a news discovery platform.
BuzzFeed is the leading social news and entertainment site. 85 million people a month come to BuzzFeed looking for content to share. How many of you have been on BuzzFeed? That's pretty good. We're branching into Europe now. We just launched BuzzFeed UK. We have about 7 million people a month there. BuzzFeed Australia will come soon. BuzzFeed Brazil. And a few other markets. And we focus exclusively on using social as the driving force for people to get the content from BuzzFeed and to share it out. And we also don't do any banner advertising. All the advertising on BuzzFeed is content-driven advertising from Fortune 500 brands as well.
Morning. CNN, like every broadcaster, like every media organization, is working hard to remain relevant. And so I work with John and Andy at BuzzFeed and Facebook to connect to younger audiences, to get our messages out, and to communicate with authenticity to any audience, wherever they may be. We're very strongly looking at the best screen available, which is usually now your mobile. So it's very important we reach people in a mobile environment. And from my point of view as a journalist or former journalist, it's about representing the people in the field, giving them the access to the consumer and giving the consumer access to them. That's the key difference that we have as a brand, and that's my mission, if you like it.
Okay, thank you. Let's start with Facebook, probably the most talked about organisation up here. What are the opportunities for broadcasters to do what you said, to share content, start stories rolling on Facebook?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of ways. Everything from engaging audiences before the broadcast to during the broadcast and then after the broadcast. And then also Instagram is part of the Facebook family and is also a different but complementary platform to share content. So for instance, CNN on their New Day show, which is the morning show in the US, has been sharing great Instagram content from the green room, which gives people a way to understand and see who's going to be on the show. They share behind-the-scenes content on Instagram. During the show, they're not just that, but news broadcasters around the world are pulling content in from their viewers as part of the broadcast. We actually just launched this week at MIP some APIs to bring in content, public content, into programming to make that easy for broadcasters. So continually more and more, we are starting to see people on Facebook being meaningful brought into programming. And then after the show, sharing content and allowing there to be a conversation or facilitating a conversation around the news to continue after the broadcast is over.
Simon, can I add something to that? Because we're building a thing with Instagram which will expose the work of our correspondents, just their snapshots, what they're taking. All of this material is out there, and it's about bringing it back into the broadcast environment as well as these outlets like Facebook. But we also did a project with Instagram recently with 15-second interviews with German politicians during the elections. And I think that sort of thing of Vine, Instagram, these kind of video snapshots are going to become very important soon.
And is it only the big players, the CNNs, the BBCs, that are doing this with you? Or is it open to anybody to use this sort of facility?
Yeah, I mean, we're an open platform. The APIs are available to everyone. The social plugins are available to everyone. So, I mean, we have seen over and over again that we are actually a platform for growth. So no matter where you start, allowing people to connect with your content and share your content is, I think, a incredible growth strategy. And as John will tell you, I hope, we've been a major driver of BuzzFeed since day one and continually are growing as a referral source to them. And so no matter where you are, we've actually are seeing incredible growth in referrals over the last year. And we're going to share some data in a couple weeks once we've got it locked in. But more and more, we continue to grow.
And is this in every market?
Definitely.
Because we hear a lot about Facebook because it's a US company about what it's doing in the States. But what about other parts of the world, Asia, for example? Because there's huge growth in places like Indonesia and Vietnam.
Yeah, I mean, it's consistent across the world. It's pretty incredible to look at the data and just see that the way we surface content in the US is exactly the same as we surface it in smaller markets. And so the opportunity is there and equal no matter where you are.
Okay, you've given a cue for John, another plug for John. Tell us about what you've been doing, particularly with CNN, because that's an interesting story.
Yeah, so I think I'll first go off of the Andy thing to kind of talk about just how we've gotten where we are, and then I'll talk about the CNN thing briefly. Jonah Peretti, our founder, who had come from Huffington Post, his big insight was that people were increasingly finding content from social. About 40% of our traffic now comes from Facebook. 70% of our traffic overall comes from social sources, broadly defined. And it's lots of little sharing. We don't rely on a single Facebook presence to blast people with content or a single Twitter presence to blast people with content. It's lots of little sharing. And that ratio tends to be very small. Even on a post on BuzzFeed that gets 1 million views, let's say, it might be 1 to 7. For every one person that shares out a piece of content, 7 people will inbound content. We started out as very much an entertainment and a meme and a web culture and a kittens type site. And we moved upstream into hard news when we saw that social was really taking over the world in terms of how people got content. we found ourselves in a position 18 months ago where we wanted to go into this stuff, and we hired Ben Smith as our editor-in-chief and built out our politics vertical and our technology vertical and our business vertical. And
So it means you've actually got journalists working there.
we have 100 full-time writers at BuzzFeed. It's probably 120 now that
So you are becoming not only a curator of content, but an originator
It's a
of content.
misnomer. We actually are not a curator of content. We do not do any aggregation. We do not rewrite anybody's stories on BuzzFeed. Everything we do is original content. We have a massive tracking network as well. We provide analytics to track their own traffic to publishers, sites like Time and Huffington Post and New York Times and Daily Mail. And when we see stories sparking with social traffic on those sites, we'll trigger direct links onto the front page of BuzzFeed, but we don't actually aggregate. With CNN, we don't have massive field reporting in terms of gathering news and video from around the world. So where the collaboration with CNN made sense is they have that field capability. They have the ability to gather everything in real time. They provide us with that kind of video footage, and then we're able to remix it, recut it in a very short, shareable type format on YouTube for a younger audience. And there's very little cannibalization because the audience that goes to CNN, to the television networks, and so far this is exclusively in the US, we hope to take it to Europe, is very different than the audience that goes online for video. So there's no cannibalistic effect. CNN was very forward-thinking to recognize that, and a lot of television networks, I think, wrongly are afraid of cannibalizing themselves, but there simply is almost no audience overlap between television news viewers and online news viewers.
It's very much the same. I mean, I've been through this in newspapers as well. There is no real such thing as cannibalization. The internet as a whole is cannibalizing other people's businesses, not even your own website or one particular website. It is shifts in habits. So you've got to be there. It's not a cannibalization.
Which is what the
factor at
Ofcom
all.
report said, for example.
Absolutely.
So is that the same, Andy, in your experience in the US? Is it a bigger shift? It was 1/3 in the UK. Any ideas what the news sources are from your statistics in the US market, for example?
It's funny. I mean, similar to John, there is a misnomer about Facebook content and that it's all meme content that people share. And actually, we just are in the middle of doing a project with Pew, which in the U.S. is a organization that analyzes news content and sharing. And we looked at what kind of content is shared across Facebook. And actually, there's more hard news that's shared and more referrals sent from hard news than there is from soft news. So, I think we tend to remember the funny and silly stuff, but I think the more meaningful stuff is what sticks with you. And that is very prevalent.
And Simon, I think that there's this misnomer that the traditional media, even dating back 100 years, was just filled with hard news content, and there was no soft news content. And soft news content and soft entertainment is something that arose with the internet. I think you could look at any television network today in any country, and you'd be hard-pressed to find more than 5 or 6%, with the exception of a exclusively news network. That has that much news during the day. You've got a lot of Dancing with Stars and celebrity cooking and all of these different things, and maybe a little bit of news. I actually think that when you look at social, when you look at a site like BuzzFeed, we're bringing more hard news on a relative basis than a lot of the traditional media networks do now.
So what is the ratio?
For us, we get 30% of our traffic to verticalized content broadly defined. And that would be everything from business to news, to travel, to politics, to so on and so forth. And 70% of our traffic comes to memes and cats and animals and all that kind of fun, lighthearted web culture entertainment.
Simon, I can echo that, and I'm sure Moeed would as well. I mean, we did a really amazing analysis about 2 years ago on what was being shared and why. And it really showed that the content that's being shared from CNN.com is very much analysis and what's next. It isn't necessarily the breaking news. And that for most journalists would be incredibly reassuring. It was incredibly reassuring for me as a publisher. And in fact, we've skewed the site very strongly towards that highly shareable material, which is not fluff. It is people wanting to know how to plan, how to think, what should they think of next. And but we could only tell this through the emailing slots, through the Facebook slots, through Twitter. But that's been an incredibly important signal for us editorially. Mm-hmm. So all of these signals we can draw in from Facebook or from BuzzFeed are it's not just about page views, it's about the right kind of page views and signals that help you adjust the content mix.
So what you're saying is that newsrooms are no longer working in a vacuum. They actually know what the audience is
Yeah,
thinking.
and TV has always worked in a vacuum, other than sort of evening ratings, of course, which we don't even have, or ratings which we don't even have, outside the US. So digital is actually, and I'm sure this is the case at Al Jazeera, giving real-time signals back into the television business as well.
Absolutely. I think the stuff that gets shared for us is stories that cause an emotional reaction and practical value. And in the case with our reporting during the Arab Spring, it was practical information that people needed to arrange what they're going to do, like this week, how they're going to discuss and inform the political discourse.
Because you were actually a lifeline broadcaster in that situation.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is, it's for the lack of sharing of particular types of news verticals is not because of that vertical, it's because of poor journalism and poor storytelling. And I think that's something very key, particularly when you move to digital, because you're going to get that real-time feedback for every story that you publish.
You can tell instantly what's liked and what's not.
Absolutely, and I think that's more visible so as you do video online, because video still is the primary way that people want to consume content. And just going back to our coverage of the Arab Spring, you would have thought that people would be coming to bite-sized textual information because it's going to give you minute-by-minute updates. But what we saw was our video content had the highest growth in terms of traffic. So video was the way people preferred receiving content during that time. So something which shows that video is still most essential, but most of the video that's being produced now is perhaps in that vacuum without that real-time feedback. Now you bring it online, you're going to see that traction. You're not going to find it there. And I think what BuzzFeed's done with that very, very shareable video content and what they're trying to do with CNN is trying to solve that exact problem.
If you go back a few years, Jazeera was an innovator with its use of video for people to use themselves. Take us back to the story of Creative Commons and everything you did there and how that's now working with your new initiatives.
Sure. So, the idea behind for the past, let's say, almost 10 years, this idea of citizen journalism has permeated all discussions and discourse in all the news organizations, be it from newspapers to internet sites to television. And it's a lot of the the way of doing this is take. Bring it to me so I can tell it and enrich my storytelling, which is fine because it's adding value to the consumer. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to give something back and empower the community, because what you're going to produce is going to have X amount of value. And there's so many cases for particular communities that if you empower these people to take your content and build on top and add that value and a narrative that is more suited to that community, I think that's a service that is you owe to that community that you've taken so much from as well and benefited from to enhance your storytelling. So that was the some of the thoughts behind why back in 2009 we released all the footage that we were generating from the Gaza-Israel conflict at that time, and then subsequent to that, about 10 hours of footage every year. As well, released under the Creative Commons license so people can take. And most of the content was primarily lifestyle footage, raw rushes that we were generating from our very, very extensive, network of bureaus.
And have you got any idea of what use people made of that content?
Absolutely. We actually had a lot of people give feedback. So I think it was used for music videos, video games, documentaries, independent film producers. Wikipedia used this extensively. So if you search for, a lot of the events, 2009, 2010, you'd find, particularly in the Middle East, you'd find still grabs from our videos on Wikipedia pages. And a lot of these people ping back to us. So, and just talking about this new initiative with our online video channel that we're hoping to launch, we're intending to release the content that we produce, again, under, a portion of that under Creative Commons as well. So what we're building and the value we're adding and trying to make these stories very shareable, which are meaningful stories with a purpose, and obviously learning from, all the great work that a lot of the other peers have done in this space of making content informative, digitally native, and shareable. We're going to let our users and viewers be able to build on top of that as well.
Okay, we'll come back to your future plan in a moment. Peter, that's frightening for a big broadcaster, isn't it? People going to use all this material that you've spent tens of thousands of dollars creating.
Yeah, we have a slightly different business model from Al Jazeera. But on the other hand, of course, we did create iReport, which I think is probably the biggest commitment that any leading broadcaster has made to truly drawing in user-generated content. And there are many stories that we simply couldn't have covered as well as we did without it, the Japanese tsunami being one of them. It's an incredibly important product and an incredibly important part of our news gathering network. So we're well used to working with the public on that. Giving content under a Creative Commons idea, I love the concept. As you'll see from some of the video we're showing, there are lots of rights issues. There are lots of pieces of video that where we don't necessarily own the rights to every second of it. So there's a number of issues with that. But I respect what Al Jazeera does in this area very much.
So take us into this new initiative you've got.
Sure. So, the idea behind this is that, we're trying to make a destination news channel where, this new generation that turns instinctively online for news. TV has its place and has done remarkably well as a medium, and it continues to be so. But, there's a huge audience who's very engaged, and they're instinctively turning to online. For breaking news, be it for analysis and reports, I have friends who obviously don't have a TV, and they watch YouTube the way we used to flip channels, 10 years ago. The news vertical available, the content available on YouTube and other platforms is still very limited compared to, entertainment and sports and all these other verticals. So, that's an area where there's massive opportunity and growth and a need that is not being fulfilled, I think, at this time by the major broadcasters of news content. So our idea is to respect that audience and make content that is native for them. Mm-hmm. It is made in a way that they're wanting to consume, and because they've been trained. You look at the content, for example, on tech. Mashable does wonderful visual storytelling. BuzzFeed's done an amazing job with that, and with journalism that they've been investing in heavily. So the bar is already quite high now. It's not something that you can just take TV content and repurpose and upload online and expect that you're going to draw like millions of views. News in general, has a tough time connecting with people because it's being crowded out by entertainment and sports, which people are very passionate about and easy for people to share. So from our side, it's a very strong commitment. So we're calling the project for now AJ Plus. So it's essentially a departure from a TV brand. So it's not going to be reporting into our TV as, to complement the TV coverage or play as a side role to this. It's an independent destination. We're building our own news gathering footprint as well. We're hoping to have bureaus for this network only in Beijing, Johannesburg, New Delhi, Doha.
In addition to
existing
what television
we have. And then
network
obviously we're going to rely on the massive global network that we already have by augmenting those that footprint with producers that we're going to just add on to those existing resources we have across the globe as well. But the idea is that it's not going to have content that's been broadcast on TV. It's going to because obviously what Peter was alluding to is the issue with rights, because TV content has such a complexity that I have a hard time comprehending, and the lawyers even I think it's just like lawyers speak, but I think at the end of the day they don't even get it. So it's not solving the need that has opened up, and it's such an it's a service. Like we're in the business of informing people. Given just like 2 years ago we had the Arab Spring, which was a transformative time. It is still being obviously what you've seen in Egypt happening this year. What's happening in Africa? What happened in Kenya just 2 weeks back? It just tells you the reporting that you get out of these events. I was following online. I was watching TV during this time, and the type of reporting you get tells you what's happening now, but doesn't give you that context that is needed. So our aim with that is not to replace, breaking news services. We're not going to compete in that. That you're going to get on Facebook and Twitter, and you're going to get snippets of, text. What we're going to try to do is add that context, to tell the history of what Al-Shabaab was, what's the issue within Somalia and Kenya, the African Union Army being present, and so on. There's
so
a
drilling
lot
down much further into the
absolutely
and becoming a destination for information about the world.
That's the point. Exactly. Providing clarity through context. That's the, I would say, in a tagline, is the intent.
I just think listening to the conversation is kind of interesting in that with products like Apple TV and Google Chromecast that get internet content to your television, is there a difference today between what broadcast and what television is, between what's offered on the internet? Maybe today, but very, very soon. Even they literally can't keep Google Chromecast the USB thing, they can't keep them in stock at Amazon. I ordered one. It was a 4-week wait to get them. And so I just think that line is completely blurred today and will be even more so in a month, in a year.
Peter, what impact does this have on CNN storytelling?
What I'm trying to do
Microphone.
what I'm trying to do with this is experiment and really give our reporters in the field a lot more freedom to package the pieces as they see fit. And my digital team is commissioning pieces from the people in the field and cutting and slicing them, as you'll see from a piece of video that I think we're going to show shortly, cutting and slicing them in a different way, just to some extent removing the newsroom and the person behind the desk, and sometimes even the person in front of the mic in the field, and really telling the story, getting the people in the field to tell the stories. I love the thing that you said about respecting the readers. It's also respecting the audience, I'm sorry, but it's also about respecting the people whose stories we tell.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes our correspondence. And in certain cases, we're doing a new sort of package of very personal pieces from the correspondence, which I believe is good for the brand, because it really shows what it means to make the commitment to have people who speak Arabic, who are living in Egypt, who are in Syria. You know, it is not an easy thing to do, to run a news organization and have people in dangerous places. And a lot of people don't do it anymore. And I think it's extremely important that we pay tribute through the product to the importance of having people in the field.
Well, let's see what you're talking about. Let's have a look at the first video.
We heard a series of gunshots. We called everyone to the corner, all the kids and the mums and the parents and everyone. And we said, get down, get down, get down on the floor. And just as we did that, the gunmen tossed a grenade to where we were.
I was sitting with my daughter. My wife was doing some shopping upstairs. She had left us just a couple minutes before, and heard a loud explosion or blast followed by some gunshots. All of a sudden, a wave of people started running back away from the parking lot, and so I just sort of turned and ran back.
Let's go upstairs. And we heard machine guns.
Okay.
I mean, what's terrifying about this story, of course,
we
is the
started to
everyday
run.
banality
There
of
was a
it.
second-
It's a mall, somewhere you feel safe being invaded. And what I like about that, as you'll see with Greaves material, this is real people telling the story. Yes, there is a reporter asking them those questions, and yes, it has to be beautifully edited. But this is the real people who were affected by that, and that came out within, I think, 48 hours of the attack. So, you know, it isn't just about the breaking news. It's about explaining the stories of the people behind it in a very sort of intimate fashion like that.
Mm-hmm. And what reaction has there been from the audience to that? Do you know?
Well, it's been watched a lot. I mean, the reaction I think is the same as the reaction I saw in some of the people in the audience of here, of immense and instant empathy, because it is a situation that you can imagine being in, and that's harder in a sense. It's harder to feel empathy in a situation, I think, where there is a you know, not that it isn't a valuable medium, but where there is a journalist standing in the way, explaining what's going on. You're hearing it from real people, bandaged up families, ordinary people like us, who were in a mall and were attacked for not for no reason, but for, you know, in a place where they would otherwise have felt safe.
Mm-hmm. Gree, you've been working in lots of different areas of the world. Tell us the concept behind the storytelling that you created with Dining with the Enemy.
Well, the whole idea came from the fact that all my career I've been a director, producer, and a news reporter, working in these different conflict zones, and I always found myself in situations where people would ask me, so how is it really, you know, to be there? Do you feel safe? What's going on, and what's really going to happen there? And so it kind of came from that perspective that I wanted to create a show where somebody who didn't really know much about what was going on, who maybe didn't really see foreign international news, and they could come with us on this journey, which was entertaining, exciting, to new places that they had never experienced, and to see some of the things that I feel that I've experienced in the field, positive sides of these places, beautiful things in these places, So it was 3 goals for me. Number one, a political goal of coming to it, you don't have to know anything about the conflict, and by the end of the show, you understand the conflict in a nutshell. And then you came on the travel aspect, which was an amazing journey, and that challenged your prejudice toward these places, and maybe wants you to go there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the food component was the reason to sit down and share a meal around the table and to hear from both sides of the conflict. So I thought, you know, I give you 3 good reasons to watch the show, whether you like travel programs, food programs, or you want to learn more about the politics of these places.
Okay, we can have a look at the opener. I'm afraid it's in rather low resolution. Something got messed up in the transfer, but let's have a look at the opener to Dining with an Enemy.
Du kjenner meg kanskje fra steder som Afghanistan, Irak, Israel og Kongo. Det du sikkert ikke visste, er at jeg er en mat- og vinelsker. På mine reiser i krigszonen har jeg hatt noen av mine beste og mest minneverdige måltider etter at kameraene har slått av. Nå skal du få bli med meg bak nyhetene og krigsbildene, og oppleve noe av det jeg har opplevd gjennom alle disse årene i felten. Sammen med en av Norges beste kokker skal du få bli med på en annerledes reise til ukjente gourmetdestinasjoner, på jakt etter verdens beste og farligste måltid. Tom Victor Gausdal er ikke bare en av mine favorittkokker, han er en av verdens beste. Han har vunnet sølv i kokkenes mest prestisjefulle konkurranse på Cuisse d'Or i Frankrike, og driver sin egen restaurant utenfor Oslo. Tom Victor skal lage et måltid der vi har ett unikt mål, og samle mennesker fra flere sider av konflikten rundt samme bord.
I hope you're hungry.
It was powerful stuff. It won an award that we gave you last year at the AIBs.
Thank you.
And Fred Gravesick, give us some context around him. He works for TV2 in Norway, which
Yes,
is the main commercial
the-
channel in Norway.
Yes. So the war correspondent is a previous colleague of mine. And we spent some time together because he was leading a panel over one of my documentaries that I made in Iran. And then he was talking about food all the time. And I was like, what's up with this? Oh, I'm cooking. I'm making 6 courses at home and everything. And then he revealed that he had a secret dream when he retired as a journalist to be traveling to Italy and Spain and France and drink wine and make cooking programs. And that's when I said, you know, there's no way, if you're going to be ever on a cooking show, it has to be in the war zone. And that's how I realized that's a great idea, and that's how I started to create the show. So it was naturally from me from the beginning that I built the show around him, even that it was from my own experiences. I made him, we tell the story through him. He's
And
the
he is
expert,
he's a great character as well.
and he's a great character. So in anybody, because now we're selling this as a format around the world, so any country who would buy the format would find their war correspondent and their chef. I also decided to make the local fixers that we as news journalists use all the time in the field, which you never see, but they're the ones that are actually doing everything for us. They're setting up all the interviews, they're driving us and helping us. So they are part of the format. So they are, you know, visual on the screen. So you get the local component of the guy who lives there and every day.
And did it achieve your goal of trying to encourage people that weren't interested in news and current affairs to sample this and tune in and find out more?
Absolutely, because like I said, my passion is for news and for conflict zones, and so it really was to try to bring in new audiences, and by, you know, taking you on this fun trip with these cool guys and not make it too heavy. So I drip out the political information throughout.
Mm-hmm.
So you get a little bit of, we're meeting somebody, you're learning something, and then you see. You get a little food, and then you see some interesting things, and then you get the politics again. So it's sort of, I wanted it to feel like you're on a journey, you're on a trip behind the news in these places, and it's exciting, and you are experiencing a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm. Moeed, is this something that Al Jazeera's war correspondent should be doing.
I think the attempt with the digital channel is essentially the same because you're trying to tell stories in a way that can be consumed. I mean, the biggest disservice a journalist can do is tell an important story in a way that cannot be consumed for the intended audience. And I think what Agree has done is just that. It's just like an amazing way to tell an extremely important story and connecting all these different, be it food and correspondence and, having two very opposing, people with opinions and histories, be able to sit together and discuss.
Yeah, we were just discussing that it's very similar in a weird way to an Anthony Bourdain series that we've just started running, which has done extremely well. And we're investing very heavily in this area of non-fiction programming because news is inherently non-fiction. But what I was struck by watching yours was a piece that I saw of yours yesterday from Rwanda. And I think we forget quite easily just how appalling Rwanda was and how intimate it was, that it really was your neighbors coming and killing you and your family and your grandmother and everybody else. And yet you had them around the table. It was almost too much to watch. But it was a very intimate encounter 6 or 7 years later in a tragedy that we've now just shoveled into the last big tragedy box.
No, and also the Rwanda program, which is the one we won an award for actually and got nominated for the Emmys in Norway and what have you. It's a beautiful one because it's actually the message from them is like they were telling us how they came to reconciliance. And that is a beautiful story to listen to and inspiring for other. If you look at other conflicts today where they've not been able, and like you said, this were families killing each other, and how can they live side by side today? And the many reasons why they have succeeded, the government has done a good job, and you're not allowed to say Hutu and Tutsi. It's illegal in the country. So they've done a lot of things, but like I said, it's inspirational for other to look at other conflicts that have something to learn.
The problem with news is that it's not usually stories of hope that you see in the news, and this really is.
Yes, and that's what I also try with Dining with the Enemy. In each and every episode, we're in Kabul, we're in Kashmir, we're in Colombia, we're in Egypt. So in all these places, I try to sort of end on a hopeful. Okay, so it's always the last question we ask around the table is, what's your fear and hope for the future? And that's when you get the best sync, as we call it. Because then they say, well, my fear is this and that, but my hope is la la la, and so that's where we end. Mm-hmm. And I wanted it to be ending on a hopeful note. Mm.
The difference here is that yours is very much for a domestic audience, and we've got two panellists here who are dealing with audiences that are spread throughout the world. So storytelling is more complex, isn't it, Moeed? How does Al Jazeera do that? And Al Jazeera Plus will go presumably globally. So how do you counter this difficulty of dealing with so many disparate types of people that are tuning in or getting the content?
So just one point, by the way, in terms of inspiration, like I feel like we definitely should add cooking skills as part of our requirements for our journalists as we hire them, and definitely as we build out our bureaus, we're going to be doing that. So that's an interesting thing. I was just having this conversation with my colleagues on this project, and traditionally you looked at geographies as for your audiences, but now we look at Facebook audience, and I think Andy and I were just discussing this. It's like the Facebook audience, and within the Facebook there's going to be categories of people who share types of contents, and with the APIs that these guys are now going to be making available, that's just going to become a bit easier to be able to figure out what types of audience, what they do share, what are the at what levels can you connect with them. But at the end of the day, and what we've seen consistently through our reporting is like these, certain universal values that sort of go global, and these platforms make it so easy to be able to connect and find that quick uptake. Perhaps it might start in India, but then it'll quickly spread through the diaspora in America and just anybody who shares those common values.
Yeah, I would say the diaspora or the expat is really the key to content spreading globally. I think that we found that it's been challenging and a lot of hard work for us to know how to cover the stories in different markets, and we've gone into that very self-aware that we need to be able that we need to be able to find people in these countries who know how to cover these stories that are locals. With that said, social platforms make it much easier now, I think, to be an international news organization. We've done a tremendous amount of work or I should say Ben Smith and our editorial team have around the Sochi Olympics and the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender human rights issues that are going on in Russia. Those stories are spreading. It's a global issue, but those stories are spreading particularly fast and passionately over social networks between Russians that are in the U.S., Russians that have families in Russia, and back and forth, and so on and so forth. And we find that with lighthearted content as well, something that plays to. We've done a whole series of what we call identity posts on BuzzFeed, which are that are titled "What It Was Like to Be Raised by Indian American Parents," what it was like to be raised by Australian American parents. And those stories will spread very quickly back and forth because people will send them to their parents who are home, or parents will see those at home and send them to their children in the U.S. and go back and forth. So either these serious hooks between continents or these lighthearted hooks between continents are what makes stories spread really, really well.
Peter, is it easy to be a global news player?
No, I don't think it is, but I think the element that is common is curiosity. And you see this with not just CNN, but the Discovery Channel, the History Channel, some of the BBC work. You know, the curiosity is a global phenomenon and a human characteristic, and it is curious people who pursue the news, and not just prurient. I don't mean prurient as in curious. I mean people who are interested in other people. And social networks have shown us that people are interested in their own networks, deeper engagement with their own networks. There's plenty of statistics to show how narrow those networks are, but the bridges between those narrow networks are now very complete. And you saw this with the anti-Wall Street movement a year or so ago. We had the most fantastic coverage of that from places like Reykjavik in Greece. And it was the Reykjavik one that I particularly loved because it sort of showed up at as this kind of glowing orb from Iceland, and I absolutely loved having that. Things like the Nairobi attack are this is an attack on us all. And I think that is the common humanity that sits behind a lot of news. It's also where I think news organizations do have to work extremely hard now to take you out of the studio, which is an impossible place for anybody to imagine you are, and into the street, which is where it really actually happens. And I think that's where, big studio-based organizations like our own, formats like conventional broadcast news, have to go out into the street much more because it's where humans are, and that's where those human stories are.
I mean, this idea of networks is a very powerful one. So Facebook has 1 billion plus people in the world with aspirations well beyond that. But that's actually kind of irrelevant when it comes to sharing content. It's about networks, and different networks that I have personally and anybody who's on Facebook have. One thing we've done actually a very good job on is making newsfeed relevant and unique to each individual person. So even if Simon and I have all the exact same friends and all the exact same connections, our feed is going to look very different based on the kind of content and the people that we've connected in the past. And that's all based on your network activity. So to use John's example, if I've engaged with a lot of content around the LGBT controversy around the Sochi Olympics, I'm going to see more of that kind of content. Or if I've engaged with that from specific friends or are relevant to the kind of content, if there's a friend that I tend to like or comment or click on a lot of links they share, we're going to show you more from that person because it's all about and what we look at as the strength of the connections we have with each of what we refer to as nodes in the graph, which is basically people and entities like news organizations or broadcast companies.
And if you are a broadcast organization that wants to work with Facebook, give us an example of some of the tools you've got. Because if you're a multilingual broadcaster, there's something called Facebook Global, which I have a slight understanding of, but explain what that is and how people can use it.
I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to with Facebook Global, but we have our platform is completely open, so you don't have to have any.
But the way of getting different languages into the right country and so forth in your feed.
Yes, I mean we look at what language that you said, and we will give you the opportunity to translate the content that you see. But it's all about however you share is the language that you share in, but then we will offer that translation. But everybody, when we consider anybody who uses our APIs or our plugins a partner, we try not to get it. We don't want to get in the way. It doesn't scale for us. We're a relatively small team with thousands and tens of thousands of partners and people who use our platform. So one thing that are working very hard at and are getting better at, but we're far from perfect, is trying to level the playing field between all of the partners and publishers that we work with. So
their size is should be immaterial.
It's completely immaterial. Obviously, the amount of distribution you get is going to be relative to the fan base that you have and the connections that you have. But that being said, that's, as John has proven, there's a site in the U.S. called Upworthy that really understands virality, and they get even a greater percentage of their traffic from us because this idea of identity, and that's what people are on Facebook to do, is share their identity, and a lot of your identity is shared through the content that you engage with and the content that you share. So one thing, again, I hate to keep using the example, but BuzzFeed has done very well, is they craft headlines in such a way that they make sense on social platforms. And so that when people read that, they want to share it. When you see it in feed, it feels personally relevant as opposed to a dispassionate news headline, which tend to do not nearly as well as things that represent your individual brand.
And also, I think that more so than even the technology, that you have to write and produce news for the social web. And what I mean by that is the news has to be important, it has to be novel, or have this social imperative behind it. Let me unpackage novel and important. We went through 7 to 10 years where search engines, namely Google, governed the delivery of people to news. And that allowed people to write very boring news that was aggregated and unoriginal. And that doesn't work on social. Nobody wants to read the 50th story that's like a Wikipedia compendium of the stuff that went on at Wall Street. You have to write a scoop. What happened today? What happened in this market? What is new going on that you may want to share out to your friends? And that's a very different worldview, and it's a very different way of crafting and producing content. So the most important thing that you can do is think in terms of yourself. Why would somebody share this content? And that's a very, very high standard. To go to Peter's point, people do not share prurient or salacious content. People don't share out, look at this great wardrobe malfunction. You can see some great nudity here. People are not going to share that on a social network. They're going to share something which is heartwarming, means something to them, or they feel is important and worthy that their friends and associates need to know about.
Yeah. And the signal they're sending you, though, is this is worth putting some of my time into,
Yes.
and it's worth me being known behind it. And those two signals are unbelievably important. If you're prepared to email something, which is many of us do, of course, or if you're prepared to like something or tweet something, you're putting a tiny little bit of investment in it, but it's more than those pieces that you've skipped past. So we need to pick up those signals and respond to them.
Yeah, and I think the thing to do to really be successful on Facebook, and the Upworthy is a great example, is test your headlines and craft them in such a way that they're going to work on Facebook. For every story that Upworthy publishes, they write 25 headlines. With their editors, they narrow it down to 4, and then they test those on Facebook until they arrive at a headline that they feel is going to get a lot of distribution through the knowing what the data looked like on the testing, and then push those out. So it takes somewhat of an investment, and what we've seen is that a lot of news organizations are adding what they call social headlines to their CMS, or what we call social headlines to their CMS. So on CNN.com, the headline might be, I'm not even going to try and pretend what the headline, but very straightforward, as you would expect from CNN.com and as they should do on their destination. But they may have the exact same story with a completely different headline that feels more personal, that people want to share and will get distributed through Facebook.
And equally important is the headline not be link bait, because it's really important that when someone clicks that headline that they get to the story and then they feel satisfied and they feel like they want to share it. If the headline is deceptive, or just something to get somebody to click, you'll get 1 click, but you're not going to get the possible 5 to 7 clicks and 5 to 7 views that you can get if a person feels, wow, this fulfilled the commitment of the headline, now I'm going to share it out.
Well, and part of that reason is we are trying to cut down on link bait and cut down on spammers, and we actually measure how much time people spend on a story, and if they click back right away, over and over again, if a bunch of people have, we'll give it less distribution and feed, because that's a very strong signal for us that it was link bait. And we're going to give those powerful stories that people engage with more distribution.
Moeed, does any of this ring true with you as to use of headlines and so forth for what you're planning?
No, I think what guys with BuzzFeed have done and what Facebook is empowering people to do is exactly what the future is and everybody needs to do if you want to get good traction on social. But I think the problem just becomes a lot smaller if you're building the content from the get-go for that particular audience. So rather than sort of saying, okay, we built this, we ran this on XYZ platforms, and now let's say, how are we going to make this work on social? So I think that works fantastically well for, the online native brands, but just it's a bigger challenge for the TV brands or the online other, brands that are not doing this natively. So I think our attempt again is to do this natively. So hopefully we'll hit that. We're going to experiment, obviously, and what the guys at CNN and BuzzFeed have done is fantastic, and we'll learn from that. And I think there's some great literature now that, because it's become a science. I think 2 weeks ago I read this book called Contagious by I forget, Jonah Brenner, which was fantastic because he just talks about all these examples of people who've done this as a science, and he breaks it down into emotion, the need to share practical value, and so on. I mean, these things are like just every day. Like, you have to keep this in mind, your editors, your people who write your titles.
Gri, as a long-form program maker, what do you make of all this?
It's just interesting to listen to. It's a lot of, especially from Facebook and BuzzFeed, it's a lot of information I don't know. So as a journalist at heart, it's always interesting to learn new things.
Does it inspire you, or does it frighten you?
No, it doesn't. I mean, my background is journalism, and you do know that to hook people, whether you're writing a story or when I did television as a reporter, you write your own headline to, you have to hook the audience, and then you have to have a beginning and an ending and then building a story. So it's all about trying to make people interested in your material. And I'm doing so even when I'm doing programming. I mean, the whole start of the program, the war correspondent, what he's saying, I wrote it and I did it to hook you in.
Mm-hmm.
And
so it's all about that, no matter.
And there's a big market in long-form and investigative journalism as well. We have a whole long-form section. We just announced the recipient of the Michael Hastings Fellowship, which is a $100,000 journalism fellowship that we put up in memoriam of one of our deceased colleagues. And we'll build out an investigative journalism unit this year as well. And the big difference being that we feel strongly that the traditional media has sort of given up on young people and has not really made a commitment to tell stories that are interesting to anyone other than, under the age of 40 or 50 years old. That's predominantly because newspaper readers and television viewers are in their late 40s and early 50s, right? There is a massive demand for important news stories and even long form. We see it in the traffic. Now, does a long form story get the readership and the sharings that a short story would? No, certainly not. But an hour show doesn't get viewed as much as a 2-minute segment either, right? There's always going to be a distribution of that curve. So when I look at what we're doing, when I look at what our friends at Vice are doing, you can get very optimistic about the future of investigative journalism. It's just the stories need to change because there's a whole different generation of news consumers out there.
Do you agree with that, Peter?
Completely. I think this whole thing is happening in print as well. There's the bit that's being hollowed out in journalism is the journalism that's not actually terribly good. There are a lot of poor second-day stories that don't need to be read or written in newspapers. There's poor quality or no longer relevant content out there. This is not the death of journalism. It's the rebirth of something really very exciting. And I think the exciting places are in this kind of long-form committed stuff that Gri is doing. Some of the stuff that Vice is doing is extremely clever. The New Yorker is doing, still doing gorgeous long-form journalism. And this is one of the reasons why we're investing in this non-fiction programming, such as Anthony Bourdain, and having the commitment to bring you the true stories from the field. It isn't enough to do it from the studio anymore, for anybody.
Do you agree with that, Moeed?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's just our intent and commitment to that long form. For example, just as we were launching this channel in America, like as part of that expansion, we launched a investigation unit. Ed Pound, we hired him in to lead that unit, and I think. How it does online is just, you need to make it relevant because the need and hunger for that is extremely, it's identified, it's there. I mean, just the fact that we're not servicing it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I think just somebody has to do it well. The fact that BuzzFeed's doing this, we're building a team, that's fantastic news because it's going to, whet the appetite for others who do have investigative journalists. Like New York Times has got a huge capacity to do this, and they've done it. Well, it's just making it relevant and keeping the audience in mind. So that's the fray we're in.
Sadly, we've just about run out of time, but there is going to be the opportunity after this to meet the speakers immediately outside the room. So I'd like you all to join with me in thanking Winther, Moeed Ahmad, Andy Mitchell, John Steinberg and Peter Bale for their contributions and what I hope has stimulated some thought and interest among you all this morning. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Simon.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.